Hi, this is Richard White again. Today's fly is a pink Bucktail Smelt streamer. Pink is a color that works very well on landlocked salmon up in Maine. What I've done here is to use a variety of shades of pink to get that light to dark shading and then a dark back. Very simple tie to fly to tie. Now you don't need all the various colors I'm using here. You can do it with a fewer colors of pink, but since I happen to have a bunch, I'm using them. So let me demonstrate. So I'm going to start, or whatever black thread you're comfortable using, bind it in at near the head. For the body, I'm going to be using a Mirage Opal Tinsel, just wrapped onto the body. I'll take a section of that off. Lay it on the side of the shank closest to me and bind it on as I go down, not worrying about touching turns. Reasonably close works just fine, also much faster. And then I will, once I get all the way to the back, right to the beginning of the bend of the hook, a few extra turns there to make sure it stays in place, then work the thread back up, moderately open turns, and then leave a fair amount of room for at the head. Since there will be several different layers of bucktail, I want to leave extra room. Then just wrapping the Mylar, touching or slightly overlapping turns moving forward. And again, hand over hand as you would with anything else. And I'm going to move it, basically bring the tinsel, the Mylar, up until I reach my thread. So just a few more turns here. I think I've counted this a few times and it's high 20s, verging on 30 turns, but you know, you basically turn until you're done. Bring it up, hold it up, several turns to secure the Mylar. Then I fold the Mylar back a few turns over that so it is firmly locked in position. I always put a finger between the thread and whatever I'm cutting. And done with wrapping the body. I'm going to come back to the furthest part back on the head, what's going to become the head, turn it upside down. It's not necessary to turn it upside down. I just find, for me, it's easier if I have the hook upside down or even at a slight angle so I'm looking directly at the bottom of the hook. So if I were tying it from your point of view, you would turn it that way, so you're looking directly at the bottom. Right now I'm turning it so I'm looking directly at the bottom, and I'm going to start with the palest color pink bucktail that I have, which is indeed quite pale, and taking a small bunch. I don't need much. This is just going to be the belly of the fly, and you generally want to avoid putting too much on the belly so it doesn't have a tendency to flip the fly over. So I'll hold that, pluck out any shorter fibers. Now, some people tie in their bucktail and then cut it. I prefer to cut it to length when I put it in. Now here I don't want the bucktail to go very much past the bend of the hook. So I'm going to measure it to where I want to cut it. Get my scissors, move this over to my trash can, so I make less of a mess. Then turning the hook again so I'm looking directly at the bottom of the hook, I can lay this on, lay the bucktail on the hook shank. First few turns slightly loose, then really tightening up as I go forward. Go all the way up to the eye and back so I don't have any big bumps and have a smooth transition. And then that bucktail will sit with a few softer turns, will sit fairly close. I want it to sit fairly close to the hook shank. I don't want it really widely flared. I have a little more flare than I like, but that'll settle down. Once it gets wet, that will settle in nicely. Now I'm going to move to the top of the fly, and I have a slightly darker. So there's my original pink. Here's the slightly darker pink. Again, just a small bunch. Hold about 3/4 of the way up. Pull out the shorter fibers. I want this bunch to be just a little bit longer than the bunch on the belly. Lay it where I want it. Measure it with my thumb. Move to my trash can. A nice clean cut. Now this time turn the hook shank so I'm looking directly at the top of the hook shank, and bind this onto the hook shank. Again, not too tightly in the back so I don't flare the bucktail, much more tightly towards the front. Go forward and come back, which will tend to lock everything in place. And I do not have enough there, so I will put a little bit more in. It was a little too loose with those loose wraps. So things slipped out a little bit, so we go back and we add some more here. As always, if you don't like the way it looks, fix it now. Easiest time to change anything is in the middle of the tying process. The further in you get, the harder it will be to fix anything. So lay a little bit more of the bucktail on top. I'm gonna crank down a little harder this time so that my bucktail stays in place. Okay, and wait, we're not done yet. I now have a much brighter, almost electric pink, fluorescent pink bucktail, and I'll take a small bunch to go above the last. Pull out short fibers, roll them in between my fingers so they sit straighter, lay that on top, measure, cut, again staring down at directly at the top of the hook shank, bind down, forward, back, trying to keep it fairly tight. I don't want a lot of flare. Now the next color is getting a little bit out of the pink range. This one was sold as Fluorescent Cerise. This is actually all by its as an underbody on almost anything, for almost any streamer for landlocked salmon. This is a very effective color. It's nothing like anything in nature, but for whatever reason they seem to love flies with this color. So I will get again a fairly small bunch of the Cerise. Excuse me when I clip this off the skin. And pull out the shorter hairs as always. Try to roll it between my fingers so I'm going to get a good sense of what it will look like. Lay that on top of the last. Measure with my finger. Clip. Lay that directly on top of the last one using my fingers to pinch it in place so it can't roll around the sides. Smooth out the head as I go. Come back a little further to keep these bound together, and that will keep the profile a little more slender. And then finally, for the back, we will move to a black bucktail. So, nice glossy bucktail here. Doesn't take a lot, but enough to give that full effect of the counter shading. Again, hold the tips, pull out shorter hairs. This particular bucktail has a little bit less fluff underneath. Measure that, so about the same length as the others. Determine where I'm cutting it off. Now, if you prefer, you can, of course, lay them on and then do a, you could have a lot of them on there, then do a diagonal cut of all the ends. I just prefer this method. Whichever works for you is fine, as long as you bind it in, it doesn't flare too much, and you make sure everything is well bound in place. And you try to keep the head neat. So once you get to that point, I'm going to do a few turns back behind just to tighten, not very tight turns, but to keep the body compressed, and then really tight going forward. And then I'll come back. Now, time to whip finish. Two, three, four, 5 turns moving forward. I find one round of whip finishing is all that's ever needed. I know some people do more. I haven't had them come undone, so I'm not worried about it. And then finally, head cement. This bottle's getting a little low, so it's getting kind of thick. You can actually make it easier to put on larger heads like this. And a touch more. And we are done. Now the nice thing about these is they look a little bit flared, but when they get wet, let me show you one when it's wet. One that's wet really does take on that shape of a smelt or other very slender bait fish. And although these are not the actual colors any of these things come in, these colors really are attractive to the fish. So good luck, tie some up. As I said, you don't need to have as many colors of pink as I used on this, but you do want that lighter on the belly, getting darker on top, as with pretty much anything. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you'll subscribe, leave some comments down below, and enjoy. Go catch some fish. Thank you.